March 18th, 1959, 2:47 p.m. The funeral procession moved slowly down 125th Street. Black Cadillacs, flowers, mourners dressed in their finest. Everyone paying respects to Eleanor Washington, beloved community leader who died peacefully in her sleep at age 73. What nobody knew, what the police would never suspect, was that Eleanor Washington was very much alive, sitting in her apartment 2 blocks away, watching her own funeral on television. And the hearse carrying her body? It wasn't headed to the cemetery. It was headed to the First National Bank of Harlem, where Vincent the Shark Torrino kept $500,000 in an underground vault that everyone said was impossible to crack. "Beautiful service," Bumpy Johnson said to the funeral director, adjusting his black tie as they walked behind the hearse. Eleanor would have loved this. The funeral director, nervously wiping sweat despite the cool March air, nodded. "Mr. Johnson, are you sure about this? If we get caught?" Bumpy's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Marcus, in 30 years of planning operations, I've never had a job go wrong. You trust the plan, or you trust prison? Your choice." What Marcus didn't know, what nobody except Bumpy and 3 other men knew, was that this wasn't just a heist. It was the culmination of 8 months of psychological warfare that would end Vincent Torrino's stranglehold on Harlem's legitimate businesses forever. To understand what happened that afternoon, you need to understand Harlem in 1959. The neighborhood was changing. The numbers racket that had sustained it through the Depression was being squeezed by legitimate businesses moving in. Black entrepreneurs were opening banks, restaurants, shops, real businesses with real money. And Vincent the Shark Torrino wanted every penny. Torrino wasn't your typical Italian mobster. He was second generation, college educated, spoke perfect English, and understood that the future of organized crime wasn't in illegal gambling. It was in controlling legitimate businesses through loans, extortion, and fear. By 1959, Torrino owned pieces of 17 black-owned businesses in Harlem, not through violence, through contracts. Legal documents that gave him 40% of every restaurant, 35% of every shop, 50% of every business loan. He was bleeding the community dry with a pen and paper. But there was one person who refused to play his game: Eleanor Washington. Eleanor Washington was 73 years old and had been running the Harlem Community Credit Union for 25 years. She gave loans to families who couldn't get them anywhere else. She financed business startups, helped people buy homes, kept the community's money in the community. Torrino had been trying to force her out for 2 years. First with offers to buy her building, then with legal pressure, then with security concerns that required expensive protection fees. Eleanor's response was always the same.
"Young man, I survived the Depression, Jim Crow, and 2 wars. You think a little Italian boy from Queens scares me?"
December 1958, Torrino made his final offer: sell the credit union to his holding company for half its value, or face the consequences. Eleanor's response: "The only consequence you need to worry about is what happens when Bumpy Johnson hears about this conversation." That night, Eleanor made a phone call to her grandson Marcus, who happened to be Harlem's most respected funeral director. And Marcus called his uncle, the man who'd been quietly protecting Harlem's interests for 30 years. "Uncle Bumpy," Marcus said, "we might have a problem." When Bumpy heard about Torrino's ultimatum, he didn't get angry. He got thoughtful. For 3 days, he studied Torrino's operation, where he kept his money, how he moved it, who protected it. What Bumpy discovered was interesting. Torrino's vault was in the basement of the First National Bank of Harlem, right across from Eleanor's credit union. State-of-the-art security, motion sensors, armed guards, time locks, impossible to break into, except on weekends when the bank was closed, and only a skeleton security crew remained, and except when there was enough commotion outside to distract everyone's attention. Commotion like a funeral procession for one of Harlem's most beloved figures. January 15th, 1959. Bumpy visited Eleanor at the credit union. She was behind her desk, glasses perched on her nose, reviewing loan applications. "Eleanor, I heard Vincent Torrino's been bothering you." Eleanor looked up, smiled. Bumpy Johnson, I haven't seen you in 6 months. You only visit when there's trouble. There's always trouble. Question is whether we face it or create it. Eleanor studied his face. What do you have in mind? Bumpy sat down across from her desk. How attached are you to breathing? Very attached. Good. Because you're going to die. For the next 2 months, Bumpy and Eleanor planned the most elaborate con in Harlem's history. Eleanor would fake her death, natural causes, peacefully in her sleep. Marcus would arrange the funeral, making it the biggest event Harlem had seen in years. And while everyone was paying their respects, a small crew would empty Torrino's vault. But here's what made it genius. They weren't just stealing money. They were stealing Torrino's reputation. March 1st, Eleanor Washington suffered a massive heart attack in her apartment. Marcus found her body the next morning. Dr. Samuel Green, who'd been treating her for heart problems for months, pronounced her dead. The death certificate was signed, filed, and made official. What nobody knew was that Dr. Green was Eleanor's brother-in-law. Marcus was her grandson, and the massive heart attack was nothing more than careful acting and a lot of theatrical makeup. For 2 weeks, Eleanor lay in state at Marcus's funeral home. The casket remained closed due to family wishes. But hundreds of people paid their respects. The entire community mourned. Even Torrino sent flowers, probably relieved that his biggest obstacle was gone. March 18th arrived, with perfect weather. Clear skies, mild temperature, ideal for a funeral procession. At 2 p.m., the service began at Abyssinian Baptist Church. Reverend Clayton Powell, Jr. delivered a eulogy that moved grown men to tears. He spoke about Eleanor's dedication to community, her tireless work for families in need, her refusal to bow to outside pressure. Eleanor Washington, the Reverend declared, died as she lived, uncompromising, unbowed, unbeaten. The irony was that she was very much alive, watching the service from her nephew's apartment above the barbershop, probably enjoying every word. At 2:45 p.m., the procession formed. 12 black Cadillacs. The hearse, hundreds of mourners, police escorts clearing the way. It was the largest funeral procession Harlem had seen since Marcus Garvey. The route was carefully planned. Down 125th Street, past the Apollo Theater, past Small's Paradise, past every business Eleanor had helped finance, a rolling celebration of her life, and directly past the First National Bank of Harlem. 2:47 p.m. As the funeral procession passed the bank, something interesting happened. The bank's security guards, showing respect for the beloved Eleanor Washington, stepped outside and removed their caps. Even the motion sensor operators left their posts to watch the procession pass. For exactly 4 minutes, the most secure building in Harlem was watched by men looking at the street instead of their monitors. 4 minutes was all Bumpy needed. While the procession moved slowly down the street, the hearse made a subtle detour. Instead of continuing to the cemetery, it turned into the bank's rear loading dock, the dock that Marcus's funeral home used every week to deliver flowers to the bank's lobby. 3 men in funeral director suits stepped out of the hearse. Marcus Washington, Thomas, the Professor Adams, Bumpy's safe-cracking specialist, and James Silent Rodriguez, the best second-story man in New York. They didn't look suspicious. They looked like funeral directors delivering flowers for Monday morning, which is exactly what their paperwork said they were doing. The bank's rear entrance had a time lock that opened only during business hours, but it also had a service entrance that the cleaning crew used on weekends. The same cleaning crew that Thomas the Professor Adams had been studying for 6 months. The lock took Adams 12 minutes to crack. The vault took another 18 minutes. Silent Rodriguez disabled the motion sensors, using techniques he'd learned in the Army Signal Corps, and Marcus watched the street for any sign of trouble. At 3:21 p.m., they were inside Torrino's vault. What they found exceeded expectations. Not just $500,000 in cash, but documents, contracts showing every business Torrino controlled, financial records proving his extortion schemes, evidence of bribes to city officials, a complete paper trail of how he'd been bleeding Harlem dry. But here's where Bumpy's genius really showed. They didn't take everything. They took exactly $347,000 in cash. They took every document that proved Torrino's crimes. They left $153,000 behind, and they left something extra. A sympathy card, signed, "With deepest condolences for your loss. The Washington family." By 3:45 p.m., they were gone. The hearse rejoined the funeral procession just as it reached Woodlawn Cemetery. Eleanor Washington was laid to rest in a ceremony that brought hundreds to tears. That night, Eleanor Washington had dinner in her apartment, reading her own obituaries in 3 different newspapers. Monday morning, Vincent Torrino discovered the theft. His rage was volcanic. $347,000 gone. Worse, every piece of evidence proving his control over Harlem businesses had vanished. But the real blow was psychological. The sympathy card, "With deepest condolences for your loss." It wasn't signed with Bumpy's name, but Torrino understood the message. "You came after one of ours. Now you know what loss feels like." Torrino called an emergency meeting with his lieutenants. Find everyone who was at that funeral. Question everyone. Tear Harlem apart if you have to. I want my money back. His lieutenant, Anthony the Hammer Marconi, shifted uncomfortably.
Boss, there's a problem.
What problem? The funeral. Everyone was there. I mean everyone. The mayor, police commissioner, half the city council, 3,000 people. We can't question 3,000 people without looking crazy. Torrino's face went pale as understanding dawned. Bumpy hadn't just robbed him. He'd used the entire community as cover. Any investigation would look like harassment of mourners. Any accusation would sound insane. But the psychological warfare was just beginning. Tuesday morning, Eleanor Washington walked into her credit union like nothing had happened. When customers asked about her miraculous recovery, she smiled and said, "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." Within hours, word spread through Harlem. Eleanor Washington was alive. She'd faked her death, and somehow, Vincent Torrino's vault had been cleaned out during her funeral. The implications were staggering. If Eleanor had faked her death, if Bumpy Johnson had orchestrated the heist, then what else might be fake? What other operations might be compromised? Wednesday morning, Torrino's world began collapsing. Business owners who'd been paying protection fees started asking questions. If Torrino couldn't protect his own money, how could he protect theirs? Legal contracts began getting challenged in court. The documents proving his extortion schemes had conveniently found their way to federal prosecutors. By Friday, Vincent Torrino was finished in Harlem. His protection racket collapsed. His business partnerships dissolved. His reputation was destroyed.